Bonjour.
Good morning, all the early risers. Thank you. Welcome to this session. The title being Rebalancing Power Within Companies. Note that there is no question mark, so we'll get back to this. This morning we do have an amazing panel because Ardian Perrault, who is the General Inspector of Finance, who represents the Cercle des Économistes, so Jérémie DELECOURT, CEO of Ardian, please, Jérémie DELECOURT, CEO of Ardian, Pierre FERRACCI, President of the Group Alpha, habitué to the crowd as a football club, Olivier LENEL, President of the Director General of Mazars. Then welcome Geoffroy BÉZIEUX, still President of the MEDEF, still released, and this is last intervention, and of course Sophie BINET, Secretary General of the French Workers' Union, CGT, who's making a first public appearance in the. It's like a show, you know. Thank you very much anyway. So before giving the floor to Anne Perrault, who has to somewhat set the stage, I would like to tell you that the session is in parallel with 3 sessions, so we have to be the best. The challenge clearly is to have the best session, and it is, according to the organizers, we are about 400 in the room, and 4,000 according to the CGT. Good start. I said it when I started, there is no question mark. This is what we could call an editorial choice, which reflects in the composition of the panel, because on the business side we got Ardian, 80% of the employees are shareholders, Mazars, partner office, people who are involved in the capital, and Group Alpha, which is close to the CGT. Well, this is the way you define yourself, okay, Pierre? And then I think it's essential that the average situation of companies in France is not quite like that. So I will ask Geoffroy BÉZIEUX to tell us, in terms of rebalancing, what is the situation of French companies. Geoffroy. Thank you all. Yeah, maybe just to, well, today there are more than 4,000 companies in France, less than 3 million are so different status. Micro entrepreneurs, though that's a little less than 1 million who are small, medium-sized company, between 0 and 400% family business, you know, usually a one-man shot, you know, one-man show, or they make money from their dividends, they pay themselves when they make money. Then after that, they got 170,000 businesses between 10 and 50. This is the core of the reactor in terms of jobs, you know, about 99%. 100% held by one or several families. Then slightly 5,000 ETIs where the capitalistic is different. They could be, some are public, some are held owned by private equity or families, and a bit less than 3 major corporations. 300 major corporations who have a scattered capital. Usually they're public, they're administrators, salaries, shareholders. So the issues of governance, which occupy the press and even the MEDEF, concern a very small part of the system, and the question of the rebalancing is different whether you have 5 employees or if you got 300,000. If your capital your capital is held by only 1% or by thousands of shareholders throughout the world. So this is the last pattern that will be of interest to us today, even though we can well imagine that it will be the wish of some of you. What happens in large corporations is somewhat percolating into the SMEs. Well, we see that in the sharing of value. It started right at the top in the large companies, and then it goes down with various tools. Recently, we signed an agreement with a certain number of social partners to have a mandatory value sharing in the 4910, that is the large segment I mentioned early on. Now, of course, if there is no board of directors, which is the case of most companies when there are no external shareholders, you know, it's a different discussion. There can be problems within the families, but that's another topic. But we are not rebalancing powers. We are yeah, okay. Sophie BINET, you have the floor. The title of the session, to rebalance the power, and there is no question mark, as if you had written the title. At least we agree on one thing, that there is unbalance of powers in companies, with an unbalance between employees, shareholders, mainly, which grew last year because of the internationalization of the organization of companies, which can run away from, dodge the fiscal laws and legislation of states, unbalance which increase the financialization of companies, which more and more complex and fluctuating financial organizations, and which turned into a weakening of the role and prerogatives of employees' representatives, especially with the so-called Macron ordinance, the reform of the labor code, which led to the employees' representatives should be in a lesser number, with prerogatives more concentrated and less possibility to recall or call upon experts, and which has weakened the negotiation power, because until now there was a system that we could summarize by saying it's the principle of the hierarchy of standard collective negotiation could only improve standards, and today it is at a variable scale, and today the negotiation scale is selected by the manager of the company, who says if he wants to negotiate at the group affiliate site level, and they could be only, you know, the closer you got to the site, the better it was. But now this is gone. So we had a position which enabled us to be in a more balanced situation than today in the negotiation. This change has weakened significantly our ability to intervene. It is not by chance that today, unlike what we hear, we don't see a price-salary loop, but a price-profit loop, which profits which are maintained and inflation impacts the consumers, but salaries, at best, they are stable or actually drop in constant euro with negotiation power, which have been weakened for us in businesses. Thank you. We'll come back on this topic. Well, I'll give the floor to Anne Perrault for the Cercle des Économistes, who has to set the stage. Anne, thank you. I don't know if this microphone is working. Yes? Okay, it will work. So, let me try to see the economists see this issue of rebalancing powers. Well, they yeah, okay, thank you. So economists see this issue of power balancing within the companies and within its environment in different manners. Initially, of course, there is an issue that's been mentioned in the has been mentioned by the first two speakers. It's a macroeconomic issue, that is redistribution, salary, profits, sharing. And this notion of redistribution and repartition is based on macroeconomic aspects, such as the labor market situation, the negotiation power. This is something that depends a lot on the way the company fits within its market or in its own market. And and on the labor market, and this will define clearly the negotiating power within the company. So we could say that, in a way, the macroeconomic constraints acts on the way the microeconomics, this sharing will be negotiated. And the current situation, negotiation we mentioned on participation, the employee shareholding and so on and so forth. Well, this is all concern the participation. But economists do not limit themselves to this approach, but they see companies as sites where economic agents with different purposes are acting. So the business, the company is a site where incentive conflicts have to be solved. The shareholders don't have the same objectives as the managers. Managers don't have the same objectives as the employees. And progressively will come the question to know how to align the incentives through tools, instruments, incentives, bonuses, redefining of the contracts within the company as a means to solve the incentives conflicts or the motivation conflicts. You cannot move an economic agent such as the company if within that company agents have different roles or visions. We see the problems of distribution we saw initially, but envisaged in another perspective, not of social fairness, but of efficacy in the operation of the company. How can you make sure that the alignment of incentives or measures will allow the company to move forward efficiently? And this is a key question, because without efficiency, no value to be shared, and therefore no salary profit sharing. In everything I've said, of course, the company has one objective, which is quite clear, the maximization of profit. Again, this is still the case if we go one step further and we consider that the company is not isolated, but as suppliers and clients. Well, there is a new range of problematics of balancing powers, the competition law, identifying the market power as a power that has to be regulated. The market power is a power, and therefore there are other public policy instruments which are intended to regulate the way a company will function and use the power market whenever it exists in its own market, because to this power they need the counter power, and this counter powers could be the competition of competition. So even if we look at the right to bankruptcy or right to bankruptcy, usually it's a bit late to think about the decision in the company, because you need to define orders of priority among shareholders, loaners, financiers, employees. But this right of bankruptcy has an impact on everything. That goes on within the company. Decisions made within the company depend on the way, should there be a bankruptcy, how the various stakeholders of the company will be paid or compensated for. And the priority given to shareholders over the financials. So, but sometimes companies cannot finance themselves. This is the law of bankruptcy that says that. That stipulates that. Now, more recently, other questions came in which we say, well, the company is not just an economic agent which will maximize profit. It is a member of society. And as such, it should have an objective which is not just profit, but which resembles a sort of a social contribution. This is, they could include CSR, where we tell the company, careful, it's not just profit maximization, but optimization. You need to be more inclusive, greener, and you have to pay attention to well-being at work and to have prevention for social risk. You have to protect the private life of your employees in a digital environment, and so on and so forth. So eventually, we assign to the company objectives, which means that it shifts from its, sort of deviates from its profit objective, initial profit objective, and then in the company, if it is to, when it comes to balancing power, the company as a group of individuals, it is the company alone, the company in its market, in its suppliers, clients, and there are different pieces of law that that will be recently the company as a citizen. And we have to ponder the complexity of in which this the last definition puts the company. Is it normal for the company to be an agent of public policy? Because this is what it is asked for from it. So I don't know if you want to discuss that, but I think it is important. Thank you very much for this very precise setting. Sophie BINET, you did explain what the Macron decrees changed. Now, if you were to define what is your ideal system for the sharing of authority? 5 minutes, 5 minutes. No, several leverages are possible. Well, we now salaried employees in the salaried indicators in the management of companies, or it's not all the companies, only 2/3 of companies of SBF 2020 who have employed administrators, and we got about 1/4 of salaried administrators who are they're too isolated. And finally, we are not in the strategic decision-making side because no obligation for the salaried administrator should be in the audit committee or administration committee. So this is where criteria are defined for the manager, and this is what will define the strategic choices of the company. So we need to, our proposal is to have 50% salaried administrators, 50%, and 1/3 for public companies with 1/3 of salaried, 1/3 of the users for the public mission. And then we need to have real rights of strategic intervention for the employees on the strategic orientation. I could give you several examples which show the dead end in where we are. Why do we talk about the unbalancing? Because shareholders have more power, but always take less risk. We can see that in some situations, of bankruptcy failures. Companies pay the Vivart company. Vivartech, well, it's a conglomerate with a lot of brands, well-known brands, Kukai, Minelli, but this company turned badly, not because of its business model, because it was resold several times through debt with LBO systems, and therefore, which completely, they pushed for value, excessive value, and salaries do not have strategic power on that. In the industry, Saint-Gobain, which is, a leader in glass industry in France, which was one of our pioneer industry dating back to the 17th century, decided a few years ago to sell Verallia, one of its affiliates, sold to an investment fund called Apollo. They sold it 3 billion. Apollo bought it with 1 billion direct fund. The rest were debts, and 3 years later, Apollo resold Verallia, having shut down several sites, a production site, and 120-30 employees in France. And the result is that we end up with a production loss just before the boom of the demand for packaging glass, and the representative from the employees could not stop this destruction of a beautiful company. So we want to have rights of intervention on the strategic orientation. There should be obligation of conformity, for example, for some strategic choices for the employees representative. There could be substantive rights for projects that will jeopardize the social and environmental situation. And finally, a right that would be very efficient, conformity opinion on public support, because all those companies, enjoy often to say, and in French capitalism, is that it is a capitalism which is highly subsidized, because every year France spends 200 billion euros of public support to companies, tax exemption and fiscal exemption, which are not conditioned that the members of parliament can't even quantify, not even the court of auditors. And we have a simple proposal. It's to have an obligation of conformity agreement from the employees that will, for public support, you know, the Crédit Impôt Recherche, you know, this is France is the OECD country which has the highest level of credits for research, but many reports are there to show that this is poorly used, system is poorly used, not targeted. 1/3 of the Crédit Impôt Recherche research tax credits benefit to the 28th largest company in France. Thank you when you say the salaried administrators should be associated with strategic choices. Should they choose the CEO, they should be able to give their opinion. Of course, if the the employees will choose the CEO alone, no, it will be a scope. But we need intervention leverage. And you know the payment, the salaries of CEOs. Well, that's a topic altogether. You know, we got the CEO salaries is completely disconnected from the medium long-term situation of companies. We could multiply the examples when you do if you do the commission, there is, but the CEO salary criteria. This is which means that, you know, the CEO will comply with the shareholders in what was presented earlier. It is short-term versus medium long-term. Those who are first interested in the medium long-term are the employees, because we fight for our jobs. The shareholders are less and less concerned by medium long-term with shareholding that depends on the Geoffroy BÉZIEUX. It depends on the time. Most of the companies are family businesses. You know, most of the time, you know, they're very attached to the shareholding and to the companies, which not what is you say, but there are some shareholding structures which have evolved with and we can see it in many companies. You don't need funds to be majority to have a paying strategy in business. Now, the employees administrators, as they exist in some companies, what I hear a lot from the managers is that often those administrators will abstain in the votes. Often they abstain from voting when strategic decisions are they're committing decisions that I don't think so. But what is true is that there was a report from France Stratégie or the Treasury on the report of the employees, administrators, and are too isolated because often they're alone in their jobs and often they don't have the means to be in touch with the employees and to have to and fro's with discussion with the employees. Training is too limited and the means of intervention are too limited. That's why I said as a side seat, Geoffroy with BÉZIEUX, we won't do a live negotiation, but simply vis-à-vis for having listened to Sophie BINET, based on your experience, how do you react? Well, I'll start with my point of agreement with Sophie BINET, and I don't want to place her in a difficult situation. Basically, what we would like as entrepreneurs would be a patient investment capital and to be in agreement with the penultimate talk. Several drifts that took place, Viverte is a great example thereof, is the lack of long-term capital. If you got a real long-term horizon of capital, well, the better for the company. François Michelin, when a company is like a stool, but it has 3 feet, the shareholders, clients, and the employees. Well, he forgot at the time the stakeholders, which come today. But so maybe it's a 4-leg stool. But if we unbalance one way or another to the profit of one or the other of the system, it will fall. So Now, for specific cases, and I will let Jérémie echo, some private equity funds, I would say, have pulled too much on capital to maximize their short-term profits. It will unbalance companies. It so also applies in some stock exchange situation where shareholders sometimes stay a millisecond, extreme case, in the day trading. And this, we as managers, entrepreneurs, and not managers, we don't like that. We don't want that. We don't want this impatient capital. We want duration to deliver and to have a long-term strategy. And it is even more true when we see the climate challenges today. We will not be able to solve the company change in a few weeks. Now, where I do not agree with Sophie BINET is that at the end, someone has to make a decision, and there is a right of vetoes one way or the other in the company on some decisions. Well, it's another model. It does exist. It does exist. It is called the SCOP. But then today, this model does exist, but which is less competitive, which doesn't grow so much in a Darwinian market economy, which is ours. Last element, and I'm saying it again, all these discussions, you use the word managers, but managers is a very small part of business, of company government. A business manager today is a patrimonial manager, a heritage manager, and usually has inherited or has created his own company, who's taking the company, but often a lot of difficulties to convince young people to take over because, they saw their parents sometimes, their parents, killing themselves to work. There is an issue of transmission, but and 30, 40 employees around him or her, and like in any, there are also patrimonial managers who are poor bosses, but usually they look for the next generation, and they're not in short terms, as described. They're not, by your concern, by the problems of salaries, as mentioned.
So we were talking about the Milton Friedman time with corporate social responsibility and increasing profit. Is that finished? Yes, it's behind us. There are still people who are Friedmanian people. Perhaps even some of these people are in the room. But this idea of saying that only profit is the criterion for success, well, it's not. It's not even economic theory. It's pragmatism. If a company does not take on board the stakeholders, the planet, it will come across lots of difficulties, and it will no longer be able to recruit. The generation of people going into companies today want to hear about the situation of companies. So if the company can't recruit, it will die. It will lose its customers, it will lose its financing. So if you don't have a clear strategy for CSR, you lose everything. So whether it's by conviction or necessity, or sometimes both, because, people who run companies are also mothers and fathers, they think about the planet. That's behind us. As MEDEF, we have to act on the laws for public mission companies, focusing on responsible things. I think it's yesterday's debate. Jérémie, you are the CEO of Ardian. Let us hear about what Ardian is and maybe give us some figures for that. Yes, thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm going to explain to you just in a few words what Ardian is. Ardian is a company, a management company, a French management company that is the shareholder of 250 companies in Europe, in North America, and in Asia, and it employs 300,000 people. Our job is really to invest in companies. The money that is given to us by insurance companies, pension funds in America, insurance companies in Europe, funds in Asia, and to invest in companies to help them to develop. What I'd like to say with respect to the discussion that's going on is that on the listed market, capital goes back into companies. For family companies, you talked about Michelin, for example, we can keep it for several thousand years. We're looking at 5 to 7 years, which is actually quite long. you described, Sophie BINET, cases of companies with difficulties. I've been in this job for 25 years. We're shareholders of 250 companies. We help to develop employment in France, in Europe, and elsewhere faster than economic growth. And that's very important. In 25 years, I've been through different redundancy schemes, but our job is really to develop companies. Our conviction at Ardian is to invest in a company because the governance of the company is good, and good corporate governance for us, this involves taking part, the employees taking part in management decisions. This helps to associate the employees with the strategic alignment. It makes for financial and extra-financial success in companies. There are environmental challenges. There's the challenge of digital transformation. And we consider that it's good to share power, but it's also good to share the responsibility of these financial and extra-financial successes. And the other side of that is it's the sharing of value. I was saying when I introduced you earlier on that Ardian, 80% of employees are shareholders. Is that right? Yes, indeed. This is not just what we do in Ardian, but in other companies. The rules that we apply to ourselves, well, 80% of employees are shareholders. They hold 50% of our company. And we have 3 staff representatives out of 10 members of the Supervisory Council. What we're trying to do as well is to apply these methods to the companies that we acquire as part of our portfolio by developing the representation of the employees within the management teams and also by developing the sharing of employee value. 15 years ago, we launched a principle that consisted in sharing the capital gains with the employees of the company. And sometimes we paid them up to 6 months of salary. And that's why very often in the case of a buyout operation where the opinion of the trade unions has been asked for beforehand, we've had the support of the unions and often the support of the CGT union, which supports Ardian. So you've financialized the employees, basically. No, we haven't financialized the employees, no. I think it's important to financially educate them. These operations where we're sharing value, they were taken over by a charter for the Private Equity Association that invited all of its members to do the same thing. And this is a good thing. We can be happy about this movement based on sharing. In France, we're lucky because for 50 years, we've got simple, efficient tools for sharing value that allow us to make sure that employees are in line with the company's projects. We've got free shares, but this is difficult in certain family companies to have this kind of thing. We now have a new law that allows us to efficiently share value with employees. And of course, there are incentive schemes and profit-sharing schemes. Incentive schemes are important to encourage companies to share profits and set objectives for the financial success of the company. And of course, incentive schemes are important because they make it possible to set extra financial objectives, focusing on digital transformation or environmental objectives for the company, but also objectives for inclusion and diversity. Recently, with the events that we saw in the suburbs, we know that we need companies to play a role in this integration race. This is something that's very important for me. At Ardian, it's very important, and in our company, it's very important. These tools allow us to make sure that employees are in line with the strategic objectives of the company, so that they understand what we're trying to do or where we're trying to go. So I think that we are a private equity fund, but we need to convince the directors of companies and employees. That's our job. There are 3 letters. You've got environment. Environment is very important, the environment. But if carbon is important, the S is important, the social aspect is important, because it allows employees, the men and women making up companies, to prepare their pension by sharing values, by confronting with this, this environment. That's very important today. So concretely, do you get interested in a company and do you invest in the company? And this company might not have any value sharing with its employees? Is that a sine qua non condition? Or once you've bought a company and you're in control, you make sure that the company converts? It's not a sine qua non condition when we invest in the company. But we commit to, over the coming year, after coming into the company, we commit to setting up a system for sharing the value on an annual basis. So it might be free shares. It might be, at the end of the day, a share of capital gains with the employees. It's about profit sharing and incentive. And that's why we were very happy to see the widening of the law's coverage. It meant that we could set up things more easily. The bosses of companies could set up things more easily. So it's a very committed policy, a very engaged policy. Sophie BINET, is that a dream, this kind of scenario? Well, for us, I have a very simple question to ask. When we talk about value sharing, why do we never talk about wages? I'm not hearing about wages. And the problem that we have when it comes to sharing value and financializing the economy is the fact that wages are always lower in terms of the wealth created. We've lost 5 points between what was distributed in the 80s and what's being distributed today, and that's what we're saying. So last year, among the 100 biggest companies, 70% of their profit was absorbed by dividends and the buyback of shares, when we're in an unparalleled inflation context where we should be increasing wages and investing in the future and lowering prices to meet the needs of consumers. So we're seeing the price-profit loop that I was talking about. So value sharing, okay, but we need to talk about wages. It's not a taboo word. It shouldn't be a taboo word in the public debate. Okay, so it's not the ideal scenario for Sophie BINET. So you are the president of Mazars, which is a company with a different kind of capitalism. So you're at the head of the company, is that right? Yes, thank you, Nicolas. Can you hear me? Hello, everybody. So Mazars, we're a private equity company. We provide advice. We started with a great idea, a visionary founder after the war. It was founded in Rouen. It's become a French success story in an industry that's very much Anglo-Saxon, as you know. Today, it is based on 30,000 people in 100 countries, and I'm in charge of managing France. So it's the first company in the group. It's 4,000 employees, and I tend to say that Mazars is a company with a double assignment, a double vocation. The first, because we want to perpetuate the founding action of our founder, Mr. Robert Mazars, who in the 70s and 80s, when he gave his consulting company down to his employees who had worked with him, who had been his associates. The second vocation is serving general interests. So we accelerate durability, and we're lucky enough to have talent from the best schools in France, the best universities. We ask them to improve the employability of the company, and they end up taking on roles, major roles, in our French companies and in foreign companies. So coming back to the subject of balancing power in companies, it's one of our concerns. It's a daily concern, but to exercise that responsibility, that vocation that focuses on general interest, we need time, we need a lot of time, we need independence, and, you know, it's a very specific kind of company. I'm aware of that. So this is what we do to make sure that we have a balance. We have 200 associates who temporarily hold the capital of Mazars. They commit to passing it on for nothing, free. And let me tell you what we do with our teams. Our associates of the future are our employees today. So this gives us a certain number of obligations. So we've got some ideas that we share. They can apply to other types of industry, and that is, first of all, we make sure that we've got a real associative democracy at world level. We've got 1,000 associates across the world. There's a lot of voting at Mazars. We vote about important decisions, and we vote. We have a cooperative approach. So it's one man, one woman, one vote. That's the principle. We've also decided to limit the remuneration of our associates. So in a given country, our associates see their remuneration framed in a ratio of 1 to 3. Now, that might seem a lot, but in the economic world, in industry, so it's between associates, not between associates and employees, no, between associates. And the third point, we have a world solidarity model that works well, that allows us to get through difficult periods. And when a country is not doing too well, it's the other countries that come along and balance things out. So they help the teams and the associates of the company in that country. So let me, with our 4,000 Mazarians, we provide support. So we've got a lot of talent, a lot of rare resources. Our companies have been working hard since COVID because we've got a lot of talent and they're highly qualified. We're lucky to work in this way. There's a lot of dialogue. It's very healthy, it's very direct. On a day-to-day basis, our associates are with our customers. They're working alongside our employees. The youngest are helped and supported. And again, they are highly qualified. So they challenge us as well. They question us to find out where we're going. The second initiative that I'd like to share, it's all about listening. It's all about listening to fashion the power in the company. It's important to listen. So we've got a questionnaire, a survey system. 3 times a year, we check the pulse of the company to make sure that it's healthy, and we share the results in a very transparent manner. And what about the third point? The third point, let me talk about 2 initiatives that we took at the beginning of the year, because we're in very demanding professions. We have to, it's important to recognize that. We created 2 breathing periods to allow our employees to disconnect, not just during holidays. We created the Mazars break. It's a sabbatical holiday that can cover up to 3 months. And the second initiative, which contributes to gender equality, is the idea of having a quality-based partnership. We're at a figure of 30%, and we've aligned paternity leave with maternity leave post-birth. So thank you. So those are just some examples. Thank you, Olivier LENEL. I'm going to hand over to Pierre FERRACCI. You're the CEO of Group Alpha. You're also the president of the Paris Football Club, the football universe, which is a great place for sharing wealth, I imagine. Yes, it's even more unequal than it is in companies. Are you comfortable in that world? Yes, you must be, because you love football. But you've been defending for a long time something that draws inspiration from the Scandinavian countries. 1/3 of the employees or representatives of unions are part of the boards. Yes, I'm going to talk about the Group Alpha, because we're going to be seen as original in a while. Outside of the capital that is held by those who work, we provide 25% of the capital to a foundation of shareholders that's very much developed in northern countries, in Germany and elsewhere, but not very much in France. I'd like to come back over to what's happening in other countries. We often compare, what's happening in Europe when, it's the right thing to do. We got ahead thanks to General de Gaulle and the resistance. We involved the members of Works Council in boards. And in France, we're behind. There are 13 companies in Europe. We might make the 14th company, where 1/3 of the board members represent the employees. There's Germany and all the Scandinavian countries, but there are also a lot of Central European countries involved in this kind of scheme. So it's about co-determination. It's about having presence in supervisory councils. There's a separation between the board of directors and the supervisory council. And the advantage there is that you're not managing the day-to-day management of a company, even if in Germany, Works Council have more power than in France. Sophie BINET said this about Works Councils. Works Councils have been damaged by the decrees of 2017, and we can talk about that. But in the supervisory councils, there are 13 countries that are doing better than us. And why have we fallen behind? Well, we can look at the Dominique Semner and Nicolas Nota's report that has been timidly taken up in the PACT law. So I'm quite skeptical about mission public benefit companies, because they can bring employees around strategic objectives. Yes, but why are we reaching this stalemate? So why is it difficult to kick things off and get more employees involved in supervisory councils? Well, there's a kind of a trilogy. And if we look at the unions, we can see this. We heard Sophie saying 50% of the board members being employees. 2 unions were not very hot about this, and there were many employers' organizations that didn't like this idea. If we look at countries like Germany and Scandinavian countries, and even some countries in Central Europe, we don't have the impression that the economic dynamic is halted by the representatives of employees or unions in management bodies. I think it's the opposite, and there's quite a lot of research that shows that the economic performance is better when the power is shared. And for obvious reasons, when you assemble a company or a country, each person has the certainty that they're taking part in the decisions. So why do we decry this? There are perhaps cultural problems, political problems, but let me remind you, in these countries, in Germany and in the Nordic countries, whatever the political color, whether we're talking about social democrats or whatever, social democracy is much stronger than France. This doesn't solve all problems. There are conflicts. People express diverging opinions. There's not a complete consensus. The staff reflect the image of company. It's not always in line with what the shareholders want. But what I'm saying is that today we have a challenge when it comes to work. We've got to reindustrialize. We've got to make sure we go through the environmental transition. This is going to be costly. We know this. The report shows this, the report that I mentioned. So I don't know how we're going to finance this, maybe by bringing up the taxes, but that's another subject. All of these challenges deserve that there be a social, environmental, economic impact, just like after the war. So it was the CGT and the CFDT that was in charge, but the economic strength, the economic forces, it's better to, we need to share power in companies. I'm convinced that there won't be no lasting value sharing to ensure the competitiveness of companies and the safety of employees if there's no sharing of governance. We've got to share governance as well as share value. And we've got to do this in a lasting manner. The two go hand in hand. And there was an agreement signed, and it's taking us down the right path. But it is fairly modest in its objectives. The agreement, you're saying, Geoffroy, he's doing very well. Is certainly doing very well today. But I think the agreement in terms of value sharing is fairly modest, even if it's taking us down the right path. So we've got to share power. Once again, half of the countries have adopted that line of action, and France is behind. I have two questions for you. The one is traditional. Many people say that when you talk about these countries, these European countries, and you talk about the unions who play a different role, many people say, yes, but French unions and the political positioning and the stance of unions in France are preventing us from moving in that direction. Yes, we're hearing about radical unions. It's a joke because it's a vision that's based on imagination. It's based on what's happening in, sometimes there are conflicts. There are differences of opinion expressed in supervisory councils that are bigger than we imagine. We've got to stop with all this. Sometimes there are conflicts with shareholders. There was one focusing on two strong economic powers of French capitalism that we heard about in the press. Violent, they're very violent, just as violent as what you hear. So that's a false argument then, yes. The second question then, in these 13 countries, you cited the example, we can say that the companies are working better than in France? Yes. Yes, well, there are studies that show that economic performance is not getting weaker. We've got a big democratic problem in all of our companies. Why do you want companies where we are creating wealth, where the state plays a regulatory role, the sharing of power, where the sharing of power is not being talked about? I don't have an apocalyptic vision of what's happening in companies. I regret that the decrees of 2017 have weakened the social aspect. It's not just the 5 unions saying this. Marcel Grignan, Jean-François Pillard, in the assessment committee asked by the Prime Minister at the time, they have a very reserved judgment, if not a negative judgment, about what was done with these decrees. This didn't help the social dialogue. And when you don't help the social dialogue, you're not helping collective negotiations in companies. Thank you very much. Geoffroy BÉZIEUX, and then I'll hand over to Anne Perrault, as is the tradition, to conclude. Let me go back to what Pierre was saying. Employers, when it comes to these subjects, and we're talking about 40 or 20 or however many companies, they realize that it's not these. So employees don't work in these companies. Most employees don't work in these companies. So employers are not very comfortable with these ideas. So Mitbestimmung has been badly translated in France. It's about vetoing, and some employees don't like this idea. I think the freedom, if we don't, no, let me go through to the end of my reasoning. Sometimes we have individuals, men or women, who have a very different vision, a very different political vision of the situation. And in the last social agenda, when I looked at the union paths and talked about training people on the financial objectives, this is an essential part of the game. Yes, it's important to highlight what unions do, but it's also important to look at prerogatives, and it's also important to revise decrees about labor laws, because today we've got to the end of a cycle. Second thing, with respect to diversity of the economic fabric between small companies and big companies, today it's the customers who have the power. And so obviously there's a majority of small to medium companies, but it's the customers who pick up the power. They have the power to apply their management norms. I think we have to say the truth. The financialization of economy is based on account. It's not reality. If we want to put an end to it, we can. I don't think it's just about, proximity, as Geoffroy is saying. If we want to put an end to this, we have to have regulation. That is the standard. We need more laws at national level, at international level, to impose the same thing on everybody. For example, coming back to financialization of company funds, we know what happens with trading and its negative effects. Keeping a share just for 28 seconds. We can regulate that by a law. If we don't have any laws, things will just be about social washing. So keep the microphone. I have the impression that you're not taking part. You haven't made a decision to take part in the negotiations that are going to happen in October. Is that not contradictory with everything that you're saying about the necessity for unions to take part before taking part in the powers of companies? Yes, obviously. But when you're not in agreement, you're allowed to say it. The CGT is not a signatory of the social agenda because employers, for the moment, are refusing to negotiate unemployment benefits. No. I'm just answering your question. No, but what about participating in the... I didn't say that we wouldn't participate in the negotiation. There's a negotiation about complementary pensions, and the CGT will be participating. Anne Perrault, would you like to conclude now, please? Just a few words. I think we've really got to the end of the roundtable. What's really interesting is that at the end of the day, the whole debate has focused on company governance. We've not really talked about how much goes to whoever. And we've talked about the way governance in companies had to better take into account the actions of different stakeholders in the company. I think it's very interesting. I also think it's what Sophie said was very interesting. At the end of the day, when we say that small companies are in the hands of the major customers, we're talking about something else. We're talking about the market power of companies and the structuring that market power gives them and all of their subsidiaries. It's all about balancing powers. It's not that easy. It's not as easy as we said. Thank you very much. We can give them a big round of applause.
Madame, Monsieur, bonjour, merci.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Well, thank you for your presence in this room. Please do take seats rapidly so that we can kick off. So we'll have a most interesting session with the various members of the panel, and the purpose of the game is to be interactive and to come to you and to dedicate 10-15 minutes to a discussion with the room. You will have the opportunity to ask all your questions later on at the end of session. And the people who are watching us on the screens, you are in a large number. Channel 2. So it's 10,000 participants. You should be on channel 2. So intergenerational solidarity, this is one of the topics of, so we see the intergenerational solidarity with employment, training, mobility, housing. Those are the four main axes of public policies necessary today. Now, how can we link up generations among intergenerations? I mean, how can we reconnect generations? There are just as many examples as countries and examples of public policies at the national level. So, and also as many examples around the... Madam, can you hear me? And before giving the floor, can you hear me? Can you hear me? And so... Yeah, okay. So we'll have the... Let me introduce the speaker, Sylvain Rabuel, who is the president of Domus Vie, which is an international company for senior homes, you know, inclusive homes. We'll see how. Mrs. Manjula PRADEEP, Foundation WAYVE, and later on we will ask you, Madame, to introduce your foundation. Pascal, your co-founder and manager of Wavestone, which is a consulting firm in management and transformation of businesses and organization. And I think you are also public in the Paris Stock Exchange. So you will see if it helps to work on a daily basis. And Bjarne, who is CEO of and the chief editor of Børsen. Is that the correct pronunciation? I hope so, Børsen, which is an economic, liberal economic daily newspaper from Danish, right? Okay, good. So far so good. So rules of the game. We got about 55 minutes for the discussion. You will have 4 minutes each to introduce the discussion. But Hippolyte, first, the general introduction, set the frame. Thank you, Emmanuel. Thank you all. So let me start, maybe, by mentioning a couple of images. First would be what happened last week in France with, well, the advent on TV screen, well, on social network of young population angry, which expressed its rejection to our society, the need to break things. Very striking images. I could also talk about the pension reform, which has been perceived as a sort of advantage given to seniors and sacrifice for the middle-age category to the benefit of the senior citizens. I could talk also about some environmental militant or people who are quite, you know, which turn their commitment into a intergeneration war and the blaming of previous generation, the OK boomers, you know, which in a way has prohibited, which blocks any discussion and which transfers the responsibility of the current environment situation to the previous generation. So when the word generations come into discussion, there is some kind of a Pavlovian reflex, and then we could believe that there is some kind of a immediate conflict and you want to stage a conflict between generations. I've been working on this topic for years, and I don't believe in that. I've expressed myself on that, but even I cannot not see that this image of a conflict does exist in representations, and it is very powerful. Now, the purpose of our session today is to show that intergeneration relations are wider, richer than what we could think, especially today, you know, they're aware from a binary vision. This is why I'm very happy to have this panel, the international panel, and all the speakers will talk to us about all the dimensions of relations between generations. First one is family. It is within families that the intergenerational link is established. Then, second dimension is the state, because the state will socialize a large number of public expenditures, which are, of course, intergenerational. Think about public expenditures for education, for pensions, you know, and care of, you know, reduced mobility people and so on and so forth. So all this goes to the state, but there is also the market, businesses, company. I mean, you spend 30, 35, 40 years of your life, you know, and you may change your business, the business you work for with. So it's, again, there are generation issues there. So we'll have speakers who will talk about French experience, but also international experience on those three dimensions. First, intergeneration is very rich. And do not look just at the family dimension. Don't look just at we look at all the dimensions together, and this is what we try to do while preparing the session. And another point which is crucial is that intergenerational is not unidirectional. It's not what can we do for the youth, what could we do for should we do for the seniors, and so on and so forth. Each time we have to see the relation as a relation that goes in two directions. And I think this is the key for the generation, for general society, which should be peaceful. Thank you. Thank you for your introduction, very precise introduction, which sets the stage of our discussion. Thank you, Hippolyte Dalbis. Now, Sylvain Rabuel. Now, let's go into the kitchen directly. Domusvi, practical case, how Domusvi, yes, thank you. How can you, if you look at how it functions, the society company functions, how are the intergeneration relations taking place? Is it an issue as such? Domusvi, we are European expert in elderly homes, you know, services, and home care teams. Just to give you an order of magnitude, we help about 80,000 elderly people in Europe. Half of them in our homes, half of them in their home, in their household. Intergeneration, well, we are an intergenerational company because we help and we welcome elderly people, and those are people who've at least 2-3 generations who will take care of them. So this intergenerational link, we see it, you know, because these people are taken care of by very young people sometimes. So it is our know-how to maintain that, to create that, and foster that. And I fully agree with Hippolyte's observation on the generation conflict. It does not exist. It's wrong, this perception, which is still very pregnant. But if we were to refer to the COVID crisis, which is by definition the most severe crisis our societies have experienced in the last few years, and especially for us, players of the, you know, we deal with elderly patients, you know, this was a major crisis. Well, we saw an amazing link between generations. I mean, in our company, for example, the commitment of our employees towards the residents, senior residents, was amazing, unprecedented. Teams in which tens of institutions locked themselves down with the residents so as to help them, take care of them without causing without bringing the pandemics within the institutions. It was a kind of double lockdown. They were locked down in their work and locked down in our homes. You know, they were disconnected from their families. I'm talking about caregivers who were like 25, 30 years old, who for months, months locked themselves down with more fragile populations. So it's more than it was a pure solidarity, professional, intergenerational commitment. And the general population of our of our employees, you know, lock themselves down to protect everybody, you know, the disabled people, elderly or senior citizens. So there is no conflicts as such. We're going to fight against this preconceived idea. Now, second observation, though, is that we should not ignore and just consider that this is it and we're done. But this intergeneration link is threatened in the long term because, as you say, it is based on intra-family links. Today you got two, you know, population, very young and senior patient, which are both isolated. You know, the young ones can't find a job, and the senior citizens are isolated because they're too old and they, you know, and well, you know, and they're helping. You know, this family support has to be is at the highest, and the sociology, the individualization of society, the breaking down of families, recomposed families, the geographical distance between members of families will damage the support, intra-family support. So there is a pillar of intergeneration links is threatened because society has evolved. And if you live 300 kilometers away from your parents, you can't help them as you do today if you live next door to them. If you're 300 kilometers from your kids or grandkids, you can't help them as this generation is helping the youngest and the oldest. So there is clearly the need for innovation in companies to promote, foster the intergeneration link, and at the level of the public authorities to structure it, because in terms of trends, it is threatened by the sociological evolution of our societies. We'll see that later on with you, by Sylvain Rabel, that we can't expect just everything for public authorities, and your role is essential as well as good. Mrs. PRADEEP, though you're founder of the Wavestone Foundation, among your missions there is the inclusion of women in society, in the economy fabrics. Now, together with you, Madam, we'll see the international dimension of the topic, and we'll see Nordic countries later on with. But, Madam, you're going to talk to us about a country known for the caste system. Now, India. Is the caste system the Indian system, is it a source of inequalities or equalities between generations?
Thank you for the question. I come from that community which is discriminated because of our social identity, and we are treated as untouchables, impure people, and defiled. So caste system as such is there for last 3,000 years in India and certain parts of South Asia. The point of concern for me as a person from the community is, where does we see the intergenerational linkages and also support for people who are discriminated because of their social identities? Because caste itself has divided us in terms of the occupations which we do, the jobs which we do, and the jobs which are given to us are impure and dirty, like cleaning of human excrements with bare hand. There is no mechanization. My father comes from a family which does the work of skinning dead animals, and there are hardly any opportunities for people from my community, who are around 200 million in India, to grow in the larger economy of the country. We are all, like in India, India has the largest young population in the world. More than 50% people are young in India. But what are the areas of intervention in terms of looking at the global economy vis-a-vis the country like India, which is claiming itself to be moving towards a country towards rapid economic advancement? But I must say that we face a lot of challenges in terms of education and employment, although there are opportunities given to us through the constitution of the country. But there would be very few of us who have got good education. If my father, who was maybe the first generational learner, if he was not educated, I would not have been sitting here and talking to you or speaking to you, because there's a large scale of discrimination because of our caste identity. There is so much of violence. I am a lawyer, I am an advocate, and I'm also, as he introduced me, the organization which I founded 5 years back, but I am in this field for last 3 decades. For 30 years, I am in this field. And I do know the harsh reality in India and how difficult it is for us as women from the community to go up beyond our boundaries of rigidity or based on our caste, our gender, our class, our religion. And you have to become a rebel if you want to do the work we do in our country, because there is so much of a discrimination in education. Even in the schools, the children are seated separately. In the higher educational institutions, there are youth who are committing suicides, and there is no mechanism to protect them. It's really a difficult world where we are living in the country like India. And when we question to the system, we question to the administration, to the state, we don't get that kind of good response, because the economy which surrounds around is that there is a big divide between the rich and the poor and the middle class. So we live in ghettoized situation. So there is no upper mobility in terms of people who are born as untouchables or the Dalits. And there is so much of restrictions in terms of what you want to do. Like my goal would be to do something where I can live with dignity and self-respect. But the state and the communities who are not from our caste, they pressurize us, impose us to do certain dirty work, certain inhuman work. And when during the COVID times, there were a lot of us who were from my community who were the frontline workers, and many of them died because they didn't get enough support in terms of medication, in terms of relief. And I think that is something to think about, that during the COVID time, there was a big incident which happened, and it was because they were forced to live in that village by the dominant caste, and where a 19-year-old girl from my community, she was gang raped, and then she was murdered. And if you know about that case, it is called as Hathras incident, and it took us 2.5 years to fight for justice. It's in the northern belt of the country. I come from Gujarat, where the Prime Minister comes from. And I think in that case, I visited the families because they were all put under the radar of the police and the administration. The dead body of the girl was not given to the family members. They burned the dead body. The state burned the dead body. The chief minister gave the order. And it was a difficult time for all of us, even to help the girl's family, the victim's family. And very few of us were able to reach out to them. So this is what is the justice system in the country. And then you talk about the poor and the have-nots. Most of them are struggling. They are not aware about their rights. So when we talk about economy, when we talk about how you liberate yourself from poverty, from this kind of situation, there are very few opportunities for them to grow as human beings in India. Thank you.
Merci, merci pour ce témoignage très fort, Madame Manjula PRADEEP. On abordera justement avec vous tout à l'heure la question.
Later on, we'll discuss with you the issue of difference between urban zones and rural areas, which do create differences. Pascal IMBERT, co-founder of CEO of Wavestone. Sorry, madam, I made a mistake earlier on about your company. So now, companies today, how can they be involved in our topic today, that is inequalities between generations? You know, it's a long process. How do you work in that today? You're a privileged observer, I would say. So, well, let's start with good news. That is, companies keep being very efficient in the intergenerational links. The companies were able to federate generations around a common objective, in both cases around common values. And this is a location between generations, you know, still works. I do not share the optimism of Hippolyte Elbis, but you know what Hippolyte said as introduction. He said, of course, you know there are different fora where the generation function well among themselves. Yesterday, we were listening Herbie and Koch. I could see that the music is still something that Federated Generation and company are sites where the intergenerational link functions well. It wasn't easy, by the way, in the last 10, 20 years, because there's been some kind of a gap, a shift of values of the young generation, which created tension in companies. We went from models where basically 20 years ago the business was the Sherpa model. I'm young, I join in, I will follow the path of my elders, and I accept to be in the behind before gaining access to the Graal, to the board, you know, maybe to become a partner. So when I'm a partner, they listen to me, I make decisions, and I'm a new role model for the coming generations. Well, this was completely disrupted, if I could say. It was completely broken, and we are in a mode of operation where companies have to listen, take into account the expectation of young generation straight on at the beginning of their careers. It has to be honest, it has to be meaningful, it has to give a meaning to the young generations, and it has to be honest. That is, it has to walk the talk. I mean, it is not always easy for businesses, but I can see widely that the movement is taking place, and it works. It works, not too badly, actually. And the talent war, you know, is now raging on, you know. You want to recruit talent and keep talents. Now, second comment I wish to make is that, unfortunately, I was not very honest in what I said. How does it work? Well, it does work, but for certain segment of the young generation, I'll talk about talent. Of course, companies did their best to reestablish a link with young, who are well-educated, trained, who graduated, over-graduated, and with all companies want to get them, you know. It was critical, we had to do it. Wavestone, like all our clients, we were focused on the fact that we needed the best skilled or qualified talents. But for the others, those who did not, who have no diploma, who are left out of the education system, well, companies don't do much. I mean, you know, we feel powerless in some cases. We think it's not fully our responsibility. And actually, it's something where they will catch up with us, because if the company it does not try to close that gap, which is widening actually within the young generation between those who are in and those who are out, I mean, this will become unbearable for societies. So we have to take over, and as businesses, we'll have to find solutions. Once more, we are so far powerless, but this is no reason not to look for solutions. It's a critical challenge for companies, and it leads me to my last comment. I'm amazed for the last few years about the risk which is growing because the environmental urgency is pushing social dimension to the second row. You know, we've done a lot of things since 2021. We've raised the awareness, environmental awareness, and we got moving, you know, and as manager I can bear witness, companies really got involved. Things are moving. Environmental urgency is something that we're tackling, but it means that slowly the S of CSR is somewhat minored, and they're recreating hope, you know, solve environmental challenges. Well, this will not take place if we do not reintegrate the other elements of the equation. We'll have a special mention to youth, because there will be the youth could be dynamic too. Now, Bjarne, CORYDON, you are a privileged observer of the Nordic country, you know, CEO and chief editor of Børsen, the economic daily newspaper. Is there a specific system in the Nordics in terms of fight against generation conflicts or the intergenerational management? You know, we often take the Nordic countries as examples for many social aspects. Is there a specific aspect in your regions?
Yes, I certainly think so. And I think in the interest of transparency, I'm I'm a newspaper editor now, but I used to be Danish finance minister for 4 years. So I had skin in the game in terms of delivering public policy. I think what I wanted to bring to the table as introduction here is a view from the Nordics, where I think, at least if you compare the Nordics to a lot of other nations globally, the level of intergenerational justice is comparably high. Public finances are sustainable, so we are able to fund and carry on and develop the welfare state system also in the long term. So that's good for the older generations. We can pay for high-level education and for social security. And I think the point I wanted to make here is really, it's about optimism, but it's actually also about that these issues are more technical than you would sometimes imagine when you look at the demonstrations in the streets and the very heated debates that we are witnessing these years. Because I think the big secret about the Nordics is that what we now appreciate, what we now celebrate, is not something we've had for very long. I mean, if you look back 30 or 35 years, really the situation was not intergenerationally just, and it was not sustainable. So it's been a journey towards sustainability over 30 or 35 years in Denmark, Sweden, Finland, Norway is a special case. And I think if you zoom into how that was done, it was actually a very technical exercise. Because if you take a big issue like intergenerational justice and think about how you fix it, what you quickly conclude is it's not just about one piece of policy or about one specific reform. It's really about coordinating a lot of policies in the labor market, in the economy, in the pension system, in the education system over time. And what the Nordics managed to do was to do that by building a budget process where the way you do annual public budgets take into account the path towards medium-term sustainability and also the structural reforms you need to enact to have the economy grow in a sustainable manner. So building these systems technically in the Nordics actually took us from a very, very challenged situations in the 70s to a very sustainable situation today. And that's why my point here today is that you need to think technically about how you do the boring part of politics, the budgeting, the medium-term planning, to really get fairness in place. I think the next big challenge for the Nordics will be to do so in terms of ecology, in terms of green transition. And coming back to your point, I think again, the key here, the challenge will be to integrate that with what you do in economic policies for growth, for distribution, for justice, for social mobility. And I think the conversation now that what you do for green transition is something different. It's done apart from what you do in economic policies, and there's some contradiction between the two. That's really a dead end. I mean, you need to build an integrated system, and that needs to be integrated with the budget process and with the medium-term planning. And if you can't do that, I think really you will have a conflict between ecological transition, ecological sustainability, and the economic part of things. I think that's the big challenge for the Nordics, and hopefully we will be able to solve that. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you very much for that testimony. So, Bjarne, you were talking about planning versus the Nordic countries. Now, Sylvain Rebuel. Sorry, I was having a chat with my neighbour. Yes, let's go back to the subject itself. We were talking about companies. Bjorn's talked about planning. So there's a reference to public powers there. So given what you said later on, we need public powers, but not everything relies on public powers. Concretely, what are you expecting? Well, we're focusing on what we can do ourselves. We've taken 3 initiatives that come from the intergenerational relations. One focuses on employment. Our profession requires a lot of human resources and will require even more human resources in the future. So we insert young people into the professional world. We recruit a lot of staff based on their qualifications. We certify them by validating their experience as well. We've got 1,000 in France, 1,000 young people who, without qualifications, who we take on, and they become orderlies in different establishments. We've got 300 establishments in France. There are hospitality places for dependents. So we act as a school for young people without any qualifications. And in this way, we can deal with the question of the lack of medical professionals in this sector. But it goes even further than that, no? Because you organize a series of initiatives. So we took strong commitments with respect to care staff, employing people of over 50. There'll be more and more of these. So this was a great resource in jobs like ours. 35% of our employees are over the age of 50. So they have resources that younger people can't offer. Above the age of 50, we have employees who are ready to work during the school holidays, for example. Now, we have a profession where we have to be alongside our elderly people 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. So having over 50s means we've got a very precious resource, because we're talking about employees who can work at times when other generations can't. So keeping them in a job is a substantial challenge for us. It concerns 35% of our employees, and this will go up. And what about for younger generation? There's something that's really great. You've got mini nurseries. Yes, we're trying to invest intergenerationally in therapeutic projects. Each established has a therapeutic project for elderly people that it hosts. And then there's an intergenerational focus with infants being able to go to nursing homes where there is a nursery for them. So they are linked via activities, food workshops, creative workshops with the elderly people. So this is good for the elderly people, and it's very much focused on care. And the last initiative, we created the Musvig Foundation for Solidarity between Generations a few years ago. The idea was to facilitate contact between young people and the elderly in a practical way. The last initiative was to open up the restaurants in our nursing homes to students suffering from vulnerability. So students can come and eat in our canteens, our nursing home canteens, in exchange for which they spend some time with the elderly residents and talk to them. So they give of their time, yes, with our elderly people. So can all companies set up this kind of system? I think all companies should do that, because I need more and more employees. And my main problem, it's true for the next 10 years, it won't be finding elderly people, customers, it's finding employees. As a socially focused company, I have to do everything to insert the youngest people and qualify them. It's in my interest to maintain the older members of society in employment. It's for the common good of humanity, and this can coincide with the interest of a company. Pascal Imbert, do you understand what our gentleman here is saying? What do you have to say about it? Yes, companies can do lots of things, and not just in societal actions, in foundations. They can do lots of things as part of their core jobs. But this means finding solutions that go beyond the company, finding solutions so that collective actions can be carried out in a branch, in a subsidiary. So this is what I was saying earlier on. We're in a company where, there's a hypertrophy of responsibility of the public powers. We're seeing this when it comes to critical challenges. So companies have a certain efficiency. They can move more swiftly. They can implement actions that will provide very pragmatic solutions. So in the field of learning, for example, there are still many things that can be done, and we're seeing that this is one of the means of, attracting different generations. So we're in the south, we're countries in the south. Let me come back to the international situation that is that Mrs. PRADEEP was mentioning. Mrs. PRADEEP, how can we improve intergenerational dialogue? You were talking about India, the caste system. You have a very broader vision, but let's stay with India. The country has just overtaken China. It's a continent that is increasing in population and other things. Are you confident? Are you optimistic about the wish of politicians in India? And what about companies? Do they have a role to play when it comes to the emancipation of this intergenerational dialogue in India?
It's a very important question which you have raised. The role of companies is very important because India is now moving towards privatization of most of our work. Like the public sector opportunities is shrinking. And that also is a challenge for those who have got some kind of benefits through the affirmative action policy given in the Constitution. So that is something, a warning for all of us, because when the companies, they set up their enterprise, they tend to also see that what is your social background. It's not so easy in India to get jobs. They tend to find out what is your caste, what is your religion. It's not only the issue of caste, but also of religious minorities in India. So when the companies decide on, not on how do they succeed in their goal in terms of making the company more affordable to those who don't have those opportunities. So there are no policies which are laid down by the government in terms of giving that scope for people who are discriminated because of their social identity. So the private companies, they tend to take those people who are from their caste or from their religion, and that is very threatening in the context of India being the top most populated country in the world, because see, the divide is so strong that the younger generation, they are losing their hope. They are not able to get that kind of a signal that maybe I am highly qualified, but my caste or my religion is a barrier in terms of getting a dignified job. So then that also brings out to that fact that within the employment spaces, are there policies by the government laid down to ensure that there is no discrimination based on your social identity? And I don't think so. That's not happening in our country. And when I talk about women, how do they see themselves? Because in India, women are educated, but they are not employed. That is the fact in the country, that majority of the women who are highly qualified, not only from like in my community, there are very few women who are highly qualified, but in other communities also, the women don't go out of their homes, even if they are intelligent and smart, because the patriarchy is so strong in our country, and we don't have that kind of scope for women to grow as entrepreneurs or to run companies. You hardly have women in high positions in the country, and that's a sad state of affairs. So how do we deal with those issues is also that there is no dialogue which is happening with the state and with the organizations like us. So when we discuss about these issues, they are seen as something where you are maligning the image of your country, or you are questioning the role of the government, and you are talking about lack of rule of law. And I think these are the areas which needs to be addressed by the international companies, because in the name of globalization, we have a lot of companies who are coming from other parts of the world to India, but there are no scope for discussing on these issues.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much for that testimony, that additional testimony. Let's stay on the international scene with Bjarne CORYDON. Perhaps you'd like to react to what Mrs. PRADEEP has said and tell us about what happens in Nordic countries, and tell us about planning as well, with the very important role of the involvement of finance and energy transition, and how all of that fits in with transition. And let's talk about the intergenerational dialogue. You have to train young people. The elder members of society can perhaps help them with their education. What is your overall view of that subject?
I actually think that the debate here, although we come from very different backgrounds and geographies, links together nicely, because I tried to introduce, a government perspective, a Nordic inspiration, and some of that is about planning. But I really want you to understand the term planning right. It's not, the experience of the Nordics and also some of the, successes of the Nordics is not about the state really running the transition in a very direct manner. It's really about setting incentives right for the labor market and for companies. And I think, a lot of the perspectives we've had here on the stage today has been about, how companies, how communities can really push this development, the fairness between generations, the sustainability from generation to generation, push that bottom up. But I think what also comes out on stage is that, doing that entirely bottom up is actually difficult, because to do it in a manner that is consistent and to do it in a manner that is coherent with new objectives coming in, not just economic objectives, not just social mobility objectives, not just distribution objectives, but also ecological objectives, and in a more complex world, is really difficult, even for a very progressive company. And I think we've seen large global companies taking on more responsibility in the past 5, 10, 20 years. I think the concept of stakeholder capitalism is really becoming firmly entrenched in a lot of nations. I'm really appreciative about that. I think we need that. But I think you need modern governments to put incentives right. So we need to basically reward sustainable behavior from companies and to punish the opposite. And to get that in order in a manner that is consistent across various topics is really a difficult task. And that takes skilled policymakers. And I think we need to learn from each other in terms of how we do that.
La puissance publique très...
So public powers that are still very important. So we'll come back to the audience for questions. But Hippolyte, before that, let me ask Mr. Rabiul a last question. Should we give the floor to the audience, or would you like to say a few words first? Because we don't have much time for conclusion. Perhaps we give a conclusion first? I'll give a conclusion when it's time for a conclusion. So it's important to conclude about the conclusion, yes. Yes, I will let my colleague conclude. So given the different examples, the different foreign examples, how can we build for tomorrow? As policymakers, as decision takers, how can we build for the right intergenerational relations? Well, I think it's difficult to talk about this generally. I can shed some light on what concerns me as a company head. There's the logic of aging. We're talking about digital challenges, population growth challenges, and the aging of our population, which is another challenge. We've got to plan, we've got to think ahead for the future. What's very striking is the present difficulty of public powers with respect to anticipating and preparing for these future times. In terms of aging, this is really going to weigh down on the intergenerational question in 7, 8, 10 years' time. 30–40% of employees in companies will be over 50, and that's going to create a considerable imbalance in economic life, in social life, and in the life of citizens generally. So all of that has to be anticipated. Aging is not a disease. Aging can be a wealth and a resource. But we're seeing, nevertheless, at least in the Western world, that planning is difficult, even in that specific field. And Mrs. PRADEEP can tell us about this. It's very difficult for public powers to project into the long term and to make preparatory choices. So the only thing that I can say by way of conclusion is that the society needs to plan ahead so that these intergenerational shocks are beneficial. So very quickly, Pascal Imbert, Just a quick comment. I entirely agree with what you said about the necessity to have a certain stimulation on behalf of public powers. But there's something else there's another party that plays an important role, and that is finance. So we are listed on the stock exchange. I'm seeing this directly. I'm saying this among my customers. Finance has seized the environmental question, and there's a combat looking at ideas. It's not greenwashing. No, I think that the effects, we're going beyond greenwashing now. There are still attempts to greenwash, but as an observer of the world of corporate organizations, the decisions being made are breakthrough decisions. So the question today is going to be how to reintegrate the generational subject and the social subject inside the equation. So I would like to call on the Cercle des Économistes to play its role as intellectual leaders and to lead the battle so that we can show how complex the equation is and how it can be dealt with in a 360-degree manner. Hippolyte, that's a great conclusion before we can hand over to the audience. So I think what's been said, it's very rich, the relationship between generations, but we're talking about treasures that are also fragile. So we've distinguished between preserving our intergenerational relations, and that will help us in the future to have a strong society, an inclusive society. That's very important. And we mustn't separate them. On the one hand, we don't have the intergenerational aspects, and then on the other hand, the social aspects. Let me take a very simple example. In the audience, I can see that there are 2 or 3 people who are over the age of 35, so you might be concerned. So the case of mentoring, tutoring, that's something that works very well. Supporting a young person, guiding a young person, not necessarily somebody who's a member of your family. So somebody who benefits from intergenerational support. We know that it works. There are many associations that propose this. And being with that person, somebody with whom you can discuss, it does offer a lot of advantages. There are lots of people who had difficulty becoming a member of society, but because they had a mentor, because they had a tutor, whatever the name you want to use, a senior member of society helping them, with somebody with experience, we know that it's a model that works. So there are possibilities. So it's important to have intergenerational relations outside of what we have in companies or what we have thanks to state or in families. It's something that works. So let's go out to those associations. Let's go and meet young people, because that's how we can improve things. In the Cercle des Économistes, I know that there are questions in the audience, so can I hand over to the Cercle des Économistes? So the Cercle des Économistes and its actions are important. Yes, we're trying to have a conference where it's not just saying that as of a certain age we can take the floor. It's also young people that will be arriving. There are lots of things that are being done at our own level. Thank you very much, Hippolyte, for that conclusion. Now we can open up the floor for the debate. And I'm sure that you're over 35. So we'll bring a microphone to you in the second row. Can I ask you to raise your hand if you have a question? I can't promise that we'll be able to take all of the questions. We only have 6 or 7 minutes. Please introduce yourself and ask a succinct question. Thank you. And in that way, we'll be able to give the floor to as many people. Ministre, I'm a student in political science. Thank you for letting me to ask my question. I want to go back to what Mr. Albi was saying. I believe that there's a kind of mutual mistrust between generations, where a generation facing many challenges, environmental, socio-economic challenges, and faced with these challenges, we need to be able to speak. And it's difficult for us to have the feeling that, our elders don't want to listen to us. We don't have your knowledge, we don't have your experience, we're not questioning that. However, it's more of a request than a question. Don't just remind us that we don't know. Be present to teach us. Thank you. We can give you a round of applause. So you were saying that it's a request rather than a question. Would somebody like to react? So another question. I think there's a gentleman over here. We'll bring you a microphone. Same process. So please introduce yourself quickly. Yes, hello. Let me introduce myself. I'm from Nice. I'm in charge of an association that supports college students and lyceum students with their school work. You didn't talk about the contribution of volunteering to, for example, using retirees. I think that's something for the future. In 1990, 1980, if we retired at 62, we're already tired. In 2022, 2023, when we retire, we still have some strength. We can still give to society. And I think that in the future, the public powers will have to make sure that these retirees are managed, especially retirees who still have something to give back to a society. In my association, I've been lucky. I've been able to have an engineer, one engineer from the SNCF, who found that he could do another job. He could be a teacher, a genuine teacher. And with the reform today, I've just seen that there are 20 graduates who graduated in mathematics thanks to that person who is in my association. What's the name of your association? SOS Réussite Scolaire. It's in Nice, created by the National Education for working with people in difficulty. There was nobody in a specific neighborhood to help these school children. Well done, well done. So you have the role of the Lord. And let's talk internationally as well. So the aging of the population is a great resource for society. Well, you're right. We're going to have thousands, tens of thousands of people who are supposedly elderly, but who have an awful lot of experience and know-how, and who are doing very well from a health point of view. There's only one thing missing. You know, they need to be made available to society. So in our company, we want a kind of a Parcoursup for pensions. So, you know, a kind of a platform where retirees can offer their services and meet up with other people with needs in society. We've got 2 minutes left. We can't go beyond the 2 minutes, so please be very succinct. Mrs. PRADEEP, what about associations? What can you say, and lords?
With you. See, when I was very young, the same situation happens where my parents were not ready to listen to me. So I think what I have tried to do is that through my organization, I train young people to gain confidence and to heal themselves and to question in their own families and to develop their own skills so that they can become leaders in their own communities. And most of them are activists and also social workers, and mainly young women. I think that's very important. And I think the intergenerational aspect is where you can heal each other. And I think that healing process is so important so that you have a broader outlook towards the society. Thank you.
Alors, dernier
One last international look, and that will be the end. You can continue to discuss after the session informally. Bjarne, perhaps the 2 points that were brought up, you can say about them?
One final piece of advice for the young person that challenged the panel. I think when you introduce yourself into these discussions as a young generation, with us as an older generation, I think the trick you need to use is to really turn our own rhetorics against ourselves. When we in a panel of former politicians, corporates, NGOs talk about sustainability, it's really about how we sustain what we do for you to take it over in a manner that will serve your needs. So you should, instead of making this a discussion between generations, try to challenge us in terms of, do we actually do what it takes to deliver over the society where we live from the benefits we have now in a shape that will offer you the same possibilities that we had. So use our own terms, use a sustainability discussion to challenge us instead of making it a conflict.
Merci beaucoup. Merci infiniment pour ces témoignages. Je pense qu'on peut applaudir.
Thank you very much for all of those testimonies. I think we can give the panel a round of applause, and you can stay if you have time and you want to go through things more. Thank you. Thank you to everybody. There are other sessions that are awaiting you.
Bonjour à tous, merci d'être avec nous.
Good morning. Welcome, welcome to all changing. Committing to change the world. We'll start with Bertrand Badré, who's member of the Cercle des Économistes, who will deliver the introduction. Thank you. Yeah, ça marche, oui. Yes, it is working. It is working. It is working. This time it's working. So, thank you, Nicolas. Thank you all. Welcome to this roundtable. I don't want to say that it is the roundtable that one has to attend, but if you listen to the others, they all ended with the same word, call to action, call to commitment. So that's easy, very easy to do a call to commitment. Well, let's see how we do that, actually. So we have to go beyond this mandatory path. And this roundtable is the answer to the question how to recreate hope. And this is what we're going to demonstrate today. So we are not going to talk about ChatGPT. We're not going to talk about degrowth. It won't be an issue of risk management. There could be artificial intelligence, but I don't believe that there is artificial commitment. So it is possible to talk about degrowth or, to modelize degrowth, but it's more difficult to modelize degrowth. You don't need to be in debt to be committed. You can go without limitations. You don't need any magic money. And it is, so if you want to, thank you to the Cercle for all these years. Thank you for programming this roundtable and giving the coordination. It's a great present for me. And I think it's a great present for you as well. So today we give you free fuel which does not emit CO2, which can be endlessly recyclable, and more. We will give you the mode of operation of the fuel that makes it possible to change the world. Changing the world seems very arrogant. Tolstoy warned us. Tolstoy said, everybody wants to change the world, but nobody wants to change oneself. We are the heart of the topic. And Gandhi said, be the change that you want for the world. So indeed, if we want to say that re-giving hope goes through commitment, how does it work? Commitment can be individual, it can be collective. So when I was younger, we talked about political commitment and sometimes, also unionized. But you will see with our panel that there are thousands of forms of commitment. In fact, the principle of commitment is endless. It is a world where we don't talk about, dégagistes, but engage, being engaged. Or we don't say they should have done this or that. They say we could do this, we could do that. A world where ill has become us. So, or we don't want to go into our own little garden to retreat behind the fence and resist the world. No, mystery is out of my control. Well, I don't want this. We want to resist to shrinkage, a world where once again we are committed for the most ambitious to change the world, for some to change themselves, for others simply to calm down because something's got to be done, and to others just to forget. The members of the panel will give us testimonies. The objective of the question is not to provide an exhaustive answer to the question, how do you engage yourself to change the world, but just to fuel your appetite, to give you, for you to look at the menu and to leave X tonight by saying, okay, I learned a lot of things, but now I'm going to go for it. And to say, as we said early on, get committed, get committed so that we said. So thank you, Nicolas. So now, can you all hear me? Because, okay, it's all well. Now, Jeanette Burke, next to Bertrand, who is the CEO of Tilting the Lens. It is a consulting office which helps companies opening big corporations that in the outlets, but also in the offering of products, they have to think about products. So think about people who are not exactly like the others. And this is an Irish woman, and they, no clothing supply was for her. So she wrote a book for that. So in September 2019, she was at the head of Vogue in the 15 most influential women. Christian Clow. It is in Christian Clow, is Human Adaptation Institute. He's a writer. Maud Goba, she is the head of Micro Rainbow. She provides analysis to help. She has the to refugees and LGBTs. She provides something like 25,000 housing sites. And Maud recently was appointed 100 women among the 100 women of BBC Ashwini Kaka Print of Action Against Hunger, Action contre la faim, this non-profit organization created in 1979. Following the involvement of a group of intellectuals, he's an entrepreneur, philanthropist in India, and he was elected President of Action contre la faim in October 2020. And finally, with Bianca Duty, CEO communication of L'Oréal Group, needs no presentation. She's also a member of the executive committee. So 3 questions. Cherry on the cake. I hope the first 2 questions, we'll do them in one shot. Because first question, what do you do? And they will explain to us what they do. And the underlying question that we will address at the same time is why did you do it? What was the driver? So, Sinead.
Bonjour, je suis très désolée que je parle en anglais. Maintenant, j'apprends le français. But merci beaucoup. Good morning. Thank you very much for the invitation to be here. I'm going to go rogue and not just answer your question, but to think about the larger conversation that we are having here today about how do we create change. For me, I believe that there are 3 routes: individual, collective, and systemic. But the first moment in which I realized that change was needed was when I was studying to be a primary school teacher. Je suis institutrice. I was standing at the top of the classroom, and je suis un petit garçon. And I realized very quickly that the classroom was not designed for me as a teacher. Lots of people had questions. How would I control the children? They would be bigger than me. How would I reach the items on the wall? How would I teach them? What I realized was that that was based on people's assumptions that a teacher should be non-disabled. And how I went about that was I just changed the design of the room. So instead of the children sitting in clusters and in groups and tables, they sat in a U shape and we were at eye level. Whilst I couldn't hang up the artwork on the walls or turn on and off the light switch, what it did was create opportunities for the children in the classroom to do that for me and for us to work together. It provided innovation and collaboration. From that, I decided to not just change the classroom, but boldly try to change the fashion system and maybe a little bit of the world. But there are 3 things that I have learned in terms of how we do this and how we do this together. For me, the big ambition from today and from the work is for us to move from awareness to action. Regarding the topic of disability and accessibility, often we talk, but what changes have come about? But really, in reality, particularly around disability, sometimes we do not even talk because we do not know what to say. And often when we do not know what to say and we fear saying the wrong thing, we say nothing at all. So I would love for us to have a consensus even around language. For me, I describe myself as a disabled woman. I do not see disability as a bad thing, but a very positive thing. I would be a different person if I wasn't disabled, so I would encourage you, please begin to facilitate conversations, because what are you afraid of? By using the wrong word, you might be embarrassed. But by you being embarrassed and not doing anything, the risk is we exclude people. And what is worse? To be momentarily shy and reluctant about making a mistake, or exclude people. Ensuring that we are continuously having dialogues and moving the conversation forward is what's important. But when we think about what the collective is, and moving from language to even this conference, when we think about economics, what's important to realize is the impact that disability has in our world day to day. We need to think about disability and accessibility as an investment and not a cost. Here in France, there is legislation about the recruitment and employment of disabled people. If you are a company with more than 20 employees, there is an understanding that you have at least 6% of your employees identify as disabled. But we live in a world where nobody will say that they're disabled. There is such stigma attached to it. However, in turn, if you do not have that employer database, what you can do is look for it in suppliers, or you can donate to charity. We don't actually have to do any action. We can just pay off our responsibilities. So how do we think about this as the fact that disability is part of all of our society, when we know that the spending power of disabled people is $2.9 trillion US per year? But me, I'm Irish, when we reflect the realities, 15% of disabled women in Ireland are employed. There is a pool of talent that we are missing out on because we do not see these people as viable people. And to give you a final example as to how that takes place, one of my favorite quotes is that it's not that disabled people didn't exist, it's that the buildings were inaccessible. For me, when I think about this topic, I am mindful that we are here in a tent today talking about disability and accessibility. But how did you get to this room? Did you climb a flight of steps? If anybody was a wheelchair user, they would not be able to be here. This session is translated in French and English, which is wonderful, but what about if you are deaf? How would you engage in this space? And that is not a criticism of this conference, but thinking about the ableism in society and who we fail to include. My guess is if you are in this room, you care about changing the world. The people who do not are in the other sessions. So what I ask for you today is, if it is just us who care about changing the world, it will be too late and too long. So when you leave here today, talk to 3 people who were not here. Go to work tomorrow and raise this as an agenda item and ask people, is this accessible and where are the disabled people? Merci beaucoup.
Merci.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Shannon. You understood that this is the place to be. We've just been told. Christian Clot, so what do you do? And why did you commit yourself? Why are you engaged? Happy to be here and happy to be listening to different visions, to this notion of commitment. I mean, I'll come back later on to the mechanism of commitment. And I became director of a research institute, which is a Human Adaptation Institute, which is the only one in the world which studies human beings in real life conditions, in cognitive functions. How do human beings adapt to new situations, how they evolve? And, you know, people who are submitted to climate stress, migrant, who are and we also do creations to go further in those studies, and we come back from a mission where with 20 men and 10 women and women, men and women, we went in different climatic conditions. If you're hot today, well, remember that right now, where it's 36 degrees, we were at 48 degrees for 40 days. So what happens for a human being, for the brain, when he faces situations which are new and that goes beyond them, you know, and of course people must be committed, you know, start the mission and go into this, you know, go into these conditions. And in all the works we do, people who are, you know, invested, it's not always easy, but we can understand what are the adaptation mechanisms, but also this notion of commitment, because the observation we make, and this is where this notion of crisis management or crisis mitigation, people get involved or engaged when they face a situation where they lose control or they annoys them. 95% of associated NGOs who fight against a disease or climate change or problems were created by people who were directly impacted or directly or indirectly on, by the problem they fight against. So why should we wait to be facing the crisis? What should we wait to be facing reality to start saying, okay, let's go for it, I'll commit myself, engage myself. So how can we make sure that today, of course, the crisis is present. We are in this time of human history where for the first time we got the 3 systemic crises coming at the same time, environmental, technological, and societal, but that's unique, never unprecedented, you know, but the main problems will be 5, 10, 6, 10 years with the arrival of major climate disaster. But, you know, we've been looking at this for 60 years, you know, and let's do something about it. Well, we tried just about everything for the last 60 years, since the first laws were drafted in the 50s, and they said the same thing on the first document. You know, we wanted to involve and make people dream. So we ask ourselves the question, what are the absolute necessities that a human being should have to get engaged? Today, I don't have I don't have time to give you all the answers, but 3 notions, however, are indispensable, fundamental for the brain to say, okay, I'm going to shift from what I talk and I look to I act. First, emotion. Emotion. You cannot make a decision which is not driven by an emotion. The emotion is essential, and today we face a world where emotions are parameterized by systems which are outside of our control. You know, the system of reward, like the social systems, you know, the brain with some kind of a reward, you know, it's provided by social networks and constant injunctions. You're bombarded with so much information, and we are so caught into this storm of information that it's difficult for us to give our brain air space to breathe. Emotions are paroxysmic, which is an expression that each time there is an event, there are huge surges of violent reactions because we function on paroxysmic parameter. Emotion is the basis of all. So what are your emotions? What triggers an emotion? What will make you move? Of course, it's easier if emotion is positive. So I would say the first thing that will move us is love. And never forget that usually we act because we love something we wish to protect. Second thing we need, time. Time is the essence. There is no commitment engagement without time to do things, very much like emotion. We are under so much time pressure and fiction and of things that in fact we don't take time. The more we invent things to save time, the less time we have. So this is an absolute corollary which has existed for years. So today we have to give time to time. Okay, maybe we'll discuss it again, how to give time to time to the engagement, but without the time taken, there is no engagement, there will be only words. Those notions of emotions, amazement and cooperation, because you cannot work alone, you know. So these are the 3 keys today to create engagement. And the question we should ask ourselves, okay, you here means that you're already in the engagement process. And as you were saying so well a couple of minutes ago, so how are we going to create the necessary emotion and give the necessary time to all the citizens to be engaged? 38 minutes, 16 seconds to talk about the time needed. Mutgoba.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this platform. I'm really glad to be here. In terms of my intervention and the question, what is your action? I really thought about it, and I thought about how in my work, wherever I go, a lot of people don't know that at least 67 countries in the world still criminalize LGBTQI people, and 11 of those can effect the death penalty. And for those who know, when they see the pictures on the TV or the outrage when they see a gay man being pushed to death in Iran or in Syria, is the outrage for that moment. They don't connect that some of those people escape persecution and come to countries like France, like the UK, to Europe, where they feel safer, and they seek asylum, and they are refugees. So there's no connection there sometimes to say, okay, so those are the people who are suffering, and this is the reason why they escape persecution to come and seek asylum. When they come to these countries, they become refugees, they become asylum seekers, they become the others, the unwanted. There's no reminder of why they have escaped. So this is why I joined Micro Rainbow to work on this, because I am a refugee from Zimbabwe, and I know the journey. I've walked through this journey. The assumption is always that when someone comes to a place like the UK, they are now safer. They've got a roof over their head, but the challenge is still there for LGBTQI people. They're placed with other refugees who are coming perhaps from their home country. Maybe they're fleeing war. They still hold homophobic views. They still have these challenges. So we have a situation where people are still experiencing abuse. They're still being beaten up by other refugees because of their sexuality. They're still trying to find safer accommodation because they can't stay with other refugees. So it was in one of our work where we have social inclusion, trying to ensure that people are not isolated or alone or suffering from extreme isolation, that we realized that half of the people we're working with were homeless. They would rather not report other refugees to the police for abusing them and become homeless. Because if there's no action towards the other refugees, they still continue facing the same challenges. So that's why we started our safe housing, our safe accommodation, as well as realizing that this journey is very long. I know for Europe it's pretty much the same in terms of it can take long, people are not allowed to work, and you're going through this process while living in poverty. You have so many challenges, and yet refugees are some of the most talented people where we could actually be utilized in their new communities, but that is not done. So we have someone going through the process for years. I was a qualified teacher, and I was going through this process and not working for more than 3 years when I could have contributed to my new community. So in our action, we intervene. We make sure that we train people while they're waiting. We train them about the UK labor market, about the labor market near where they live. That means, you know, refreshing their CVs, looking at further education. For those who don't speak English, it is getting them to learn the language so that they can become contributing members in their new communities. And one of the other questions that you asked was, why did you do this? As an intersectional woman, I consider myself an intersectional person. I ride in so many communities. As a black woman in race, because of my gender, because of my sexuality, class, as a poor person, because of you know, as a migrant and a refugee. So when I think of why I have to do this work, I become really passionate about it. I think of all these, you know, intersections of discrimination, and that can affect the people that we work with. So I'm really driven to continue our work. And when I hear questions like, you know, how do we commit to changing the world? I always think, which part of the world, who are we committing to? There are so many different parts that we can commit to, but always I think we can always start where we are. We can always try to look at marginalized communities. We have so much privilege sometimes that we don't see others. So I always say, wherever you are is looking to see who is not on the table. Do we know who is marginalized within marginalized communities? We were talking about disabled people just now. There are, you know, disabled people who are LGBTQI. Are those people considered? So it's just standing there and looking to see who is not there. You don't have to be part of a community to champion them. You have to want to understand them. You have to look at their challenges. You have to use your privilege to champion. You don't always have to do something. You can even amplify voices or at least understand the issues. We are in an environment where we have a lot of anti-migration policies coming up. It's understanding why those are there and how they will affect other communities, challenging our politicians, challenging ourselves, challenging our leaders in our communities and businesses to see how can we support, what does this mean. It's really looking where we are, standing still, looking where we are and seeing who's missing, whose voice is unheard, and championing those voices.
Merci.
Thank you, Mudgoba. I give the floor to Ashwini Kakar. Same question. What do you do today and why did you engage yourself?
I just want to say...
Ashwini, un peu plus près le micro.
I just want to say that I want to leave you with a few thoughts today. Committing to change the world, not only for all of us, but also from the point of view of any economists who might be here or for the circle of economists who are conducting this whole convention. So let me start by saying that all of us can collectively bring the world to a better future and also bring a better world to the future by thinking of ourselves as pure custodians of our planet Earth for the next 30,000 days. because that's what our life is, only 30,000 days, of which the first 2,500 probably don't count, the last don't count 2,500, but we can make a difference on every one of the rest of those 25,000 days. Now, can we, all of us, make frugal living fashionable? I think that's crucial. You know, let me give you a couple of examples. Every year, 100 billion new garments are made. 100 billion. And 92 billion tons of garments are thrown away every year. So every time we buy our 8th or 10th or 12th garment, can we just think about it? Look at food. Every year, 1.3 billion tons of food is wasted. This accounts for the third largest carbon footprint in the world. Wasted carbon footprint. You know, this is just behind the United States and China. And not only this, I think either this food is dumped or is wasted in the farm gates or on the food plates. Now, not only this while, 9,000 employees of Action contre la faim are working in the field every day trying to save lives in 55 countries, but 25,000 people are dying of hunger every single day. And, you know, this wastage of food is really untenable. In any case, how can we solve the world's biggest problems without deploying the best brains and the best technologies? So can we, all of us, resolve to deploy the best brains and the best technologies to solve the biggest problems in the world? I mean, in these kind of problems, I mean, we've approached the big tech companies to say, please nominate your best people for 2 years. I mean, the best people in satellite mapping, in artificial intelligence, in various fields, so that we can resolve the biggest problems of the world collectively. Now, can we also think in terms of building a whole concept of good for the earth, good for us all? You know, because if it's good for the earth, it is definitely good for this, for each and every one of us. And rebuilding our relationship with nature. And in fact, for those in corporates, I would urge you to give nature a seat on the corporate board so that nature can be represented on each of the companies that operate in the world. There's another point for all of us, which is, can we start to think about ungreeding ourselves and our world? Because as Gandhi said, the world has enough for fulfilling the need of every single person, but not for fulfilling the greed of every single person. So I think that's an equally important aspect. A quick one for the economists. I think this discipline was chosen for the Nobel Prize not without reason. I think it's very, very important for the economists to come up with a new model which can think in terms of 4 little things. One, low-cost robotics and low-cost artificial intelligence are going to overtake the human labor and human mind in a very short span of time. Now, can we think in terms of flexicurity, which is flexible security for humans and machines to exist together? Can we also think in terms of the octopus of inequality, which is going not only into financial areas, but technology and, into technology, gender, education, work, health, social, all kinds of domains. And how can we build a new economic model which will take into account this? Then raising the cost of conflict. I mean, in our world today, the cost of conflict is relatively low. How can a new economic model ensure that there's huge cost of getting into conflict? Equally, I think making cooperation and collective will and wisdom that much more fruitful. How can we make it fruitful for everybody to cooperate? For example, the cost of the Ukraine war is already more than $4 trillion. Now, if there was a new economic model which would have prevented this, all this could have been saved. Equally, I think visibly sharing global technology between all of us so that, and technology is also changing all the time. What we need to do is to share it quickly so that everybody can be on the same page and everybody can make progress towards a better world. So I leave it here for the moment. Thank you.
On termine ce...
So we'll finish this first round with a blanket duty. Thank you. I will try and speak with my bad French, and I hope that you will understand what I'm trying to say. So I'm Mexican, I'm an anthropologist, and I work at L'Oréal. Before telling you what I do as a job, I just want to tell you why I work for L'Oréal. I'm the only person here working for a corporate group. People think maybe that corporations are not acting or not enough. But corporations are very important in society. We employ a lot of people, millions of people across the world, and we also have a very high level of responsibility. The world today is experiencing a crisis of confidence. If we look at the LENEL barometer that looks at the confidence of people across the planet, we can see that over the past 25 years, the confidence is dwindling. Governments, businesses, NGOs, and media, confidence in all of these is dwindling. There's more confidence today in businesses than in the others, because businesses, they have a certain economic power, and they can help to change the world. So to do this, it's important to act. It's important to have values and principles that are strong. I'm going to tell you why I joined L'Oréal. I've been there for 2.5 years. I was in the Netherlands in my last job. I was headhunted by somebody who talked to me about L'Oréal. And I asked myself straight away, what would I do at L'Oréal? And I looked at the company. It's an extraordinary company. It's a very committed company from an environmental point of view, but also from a societal point of view. And I wondered myself, as an anthropologist, what would I do? My husband asked the same thing. So I had lunch with my husband, and I asked him, does the world really need lipstick? It's an important question with climate change and all of the challenges. I wondered what I could possibly do in a beauty company. But as an anthropologist, I know very well that beauty is an essential thing for human beings. No civilization can live without beauty. From the Mwaratu to the Metabes, beauty creates confidence in ourselves and creates a belonging to groups. Beauty helps us when we're sick. Beauty helps us when we want to go back into society after being exposed to poverty. Beauty, it has a role to play. But my second question, and this is what we talked about with my husband, is beauty relevant? It's necessary, but is it relevant in the world today? And I said to myself, yes, it is. Because when I see the world, there are climate problems, there are social problems, and among the social problems, it's the inclusion problems that are the biggest. L'Oréal is a company that is sold in 150 countries. It produces for 2 billion people, and it's the 4th biggest advertiser in the world. So with this, we've got a huge responsibility. And with the company, we want to create a more inclusive world. And when a company like ours and society has the same need, there's an intersection that's created. Our philosophy is to create beauty to help the world progress. It's beauty that's more inclusive, more generous, more responsible for the planet, and more responsible from a societal point of view. Of course, in the executive committee, we've got lots of people. Some people, so our target, we have societal targets and environmental targets. We've got a very strong leader when it comes to sustainable development, Alexandra Pat. But at the same time, we have Barbara Vernos, who's trying to change the industry. Petra Komi wants to make the industry focus on green sciences. 15% of products are going to be organic products by 2030. or generated by abundant minerals. In finance, we have responsible financiers. We're investing a lot in funds for the climate, for hunger. We've got a foundation. We do a lot for women's empowerment, for women in science. And we do a lot for creating a more inclusive world. I met Sinead. We were studying our employees, and for the first time, we asked them whether they belong to a minority. I haven't got the answers, but I know that 67% provided responses to the questionnaire, which is great. So what did I do? What do I do? I'm in charge of the group's engagement or commitment and public affairs. I talk to people outside the company. I try and help them to understand the business and the intersections. So I talk to very diverse people to try and understand them, because communication and confidence require multiple voices. It's important to understand. It's important to have empathy to be able to act. Thank you very much, Blanca. Bertrand, do you want us to invite the audience to ask questions before we move on? If you have a question, raise your hand, and please choose a speaker for your question. The microphones are going round. Off we go. Please introduce yourself too. Yes, you can hear me. Please introduce yourself. Yes, of course. Hello, everybody. Perhaps you heard me yesterday afternoon. I'm Dina Founeret. I'm a qualified person for working with the disabled. I am part of the few 20 people qualified by the National Council for Disabled. I had a stroke. I had my life beforehand, and now I'm in my new life. And I wanted to thank you and say well done, because for 3 days now, I've been to different places, and here we've been talking about something really genuine, true. I think this is the way we can all be better. We can be in a win-win situation. It brings to mind a question. Would you want to insert into all of that the share of invisible disability that exists? You know, earlier on, yes, we met up earlier on, just by chance. It was just for bottles, and nobody had thought about them. I've lost my French.
Français, parce que là c'est parti, je suis
I suffer from aphasia. And where is your question? I've got a boat. It's a sports boat. And it's launching the Grand Aphasique Impulse, the big aphasia impulse. It's left from Athens. It's going to New York next year, and then we'll come back here. The idea is to impel this idea of the life beforehand and the life afterwards with hindsight. So aphasic impulse. We'll let the speakers say something. Sinead, for example, would you like to say anything about the taking into account of invisible disability?
For your question and for your help earlier, what you were describing was you found out that I drink too much Diet Coke, particularly early in the morning, in that I went to the bar and ordered a Le Gazeuse and a Coca Zero. But I could not reach the counter, it was too high. And you kindly offered if you could support with reaching those drinks for me or paying. I was embarrassed you discovered my Diet Coke habit, but very grateful for your help. You bring up an excellent question around visible and invisible disabilities. Disability is broad. If I was to ask people in this room to raise your hand if you were disabled, I imagine there may be. Hello, bonjour, bonjour. But if I asked you how many of you have increased the text size on your iPhone to be able to read it, there is more of you. If I asked you how many of you can only hear out of one ear, how many of you have dyslexia, how many of you use text messages because phone calls are difficult, the reality is disability is a broad category. How many of you experience anxiety? How many of you have had depression? Have any of you had cancer or an eating disorder? So much of the challenge with disability is that we think of it in one dimension. That is also the challenge with legislation, policy, and compliance, that when we design spaces to be accessible, we design them for wheelchair users. And while that is important, the reality is we are all getting older. Lots of the population of this conference, some of them look like they are retirees. It is difficult to manage those steps. We need to build a more sustainable and accessible world. But just to build on some of the comments that came here, I think what's really interesting about the discussion here is that, Ash, you talked about, and I would love to challenge, if it is good for the planet, it is good for the people. I think this is one of the questions where asking who is in the room, asking where these things dissect is really important. What we decided in terms of sustainability and being good for the planet is the removal of plastic straws and the removal of single-use plastic. And while this does increase the impact of sustainability on the planet, it removes access for disabled people. For disabled people, some of whom don't have use of their arms, they need a plastic straw. How many of you have tried to drink with a paper straw? C'est mauvais. C'est mauvais. C'est un cauchemar. And yet, who is in the room when the policies and the decisions are being made? And as we think about the impact that the fashion industry has in sustainability, I think that is a really good and important question. We need to buy less, we need to wear more, but we need to buy more accessible clothes. For example, how many people here have had to sleep in a dress? Have had to sleep in a dress, ever? Where is the zip in a dress? Where is the zip in a dress? How do you get out of it? You need help, because a dress was designed by a man in an era where women had husbands or domestic help. It is the same reason why women do not have pockets in their clothes. It's so you buy handbags. Men have pockets because they are businessmen and they are functional. We need to be bigger consumers and buy handbags. So how do we redesign fashion as a whole? How do we wear the items that we buy at least 30 times? How do we use the tote bags that we have and use them at least 250 times, even when made of canvas? I think what the discussion has brought about today is that we need more people in the room where decisions are made for better innovations and better economies. And that includes all of us. You are valid with your disability if it is visible like mine or if it is invisible like others. Disability will affect all of us at some stage in our lives. Merci.
Blanca, vous vouliez rajouter quelque chose sur cette question?
Would you like to add something, Blanca? Yes, very quickly. Of course, there are many people who have disabilities and not visible, and that's why we did the study at L'Oréal, to know about this, because we've got to get rid of the stigma. There are lots of things that are not visible, neurodivergency, for example. There are lots of things that we don't see. We have to get rid of the stigma and talk about them. And I think, when you have an enterprising company that takes into account the needs of others, it becomes more empathetic and stronger, because, what helps some is going to help others. Are there other questions in the room? There are 3 of you to raise your hands. Please try and be quite short with your questions. We've only got 12 minutes. Please tell us who you are and who the question is for. Yes, hello. I don't know whether I should ask it in English or French. Say it in French. My question is about for the president of Action Against Hunger. I managed a company in India, and I always wondered why we can't manage in these organizations to get rid of famine. What's happening? Why can't we get rid of famine? Why can't we get rid of famine in the world? In India, for example.
When I was in Chennai, for example, you can see that people are suffering for real. And I'm wondering why an NGO like Action contre la faim is not able to eradicate the hunger, as simple as that.
Hunger is a very complex issue. It's not just, poverty, it's not just inequality, it's not just, but I think great efforts are being made around the world to prevent the deaths of 25,000 people every day. And in India, it's the same story, but it all starts with, in most cases, malnutrition or poverty. And poverty comes from, inequality or conflict. So it's a very big kind of complex issue. But if we have the will and the wisdom, this world certainly has enough food, enough logistics, enough technology to solve the problem globally forever. But it requires that will and wisdom of everybody combined. And if that is there, it is quite easy. I gave you the example of wastage. That is only one of the ways in which it can be solved. Severe and acute malnutrition and so on can be solved in a very different way and very simple answers. But I think collectively, the world, all of us, we need to sit down and and I just give you another example, this will and wisdom. We have been able to overcome COVID. In 3 years, 6.8 million people died of COVID. And how much was spent to resolve COVID around the world? Take a guess. How much money? $19 trillion was spent to eliminate COVID. $19 trillion, 12 zeros. And to eliminate hunger, it is difficult for all the organizations put together. In the same period, 20 million people died of hunger. But it is difficult for us to be able to get $20 billion a year to eliminate hunger. So $20 trillion was spent. Very good. I think we found the right answers. We did the right thing. The will and the wisdom was perfect. But we also need the same will and wisdom. And why did this happen? Because COVID affected everybody equally. Hunger does not affect everybody equally. So let us collectively find the will and the wisdom. Thank you.
Yes, Cécile Delettré, in International Féminin. This is for Blanca and Bertrand Bardet. Concerning the confidence crisis, you were talking about the confidence crisis in businesses, NGOs, and business NGO partnerships. How can we engage the public when most people think that it's just about greenwashing or social washing, when it's L'Oréal, for example, that is working on local actions for Rosegras or working with women at international level? Thank you for your question. So this confidence crisis also comes alongside an attention crisis that there's not enough attention. We want answers quickly. We want quick answers saying what the position is. And for many things, we have to understand. We have to understand the depth of the problem. And as Sinead said, sometimes there are dilemmas. You can do something that's good for the planet, but that can have consequences on employment. You have to think about things in a broader way. I think that the only way to deal with this is to have real conversations, not just to adopt stances. There are many people who adopt a position on social media. And I'm saying before adopting a position, you have to understand the situation. You also have to be a legitimate person to talk about something. I wouldn't be able to talk about something if I didn't feel legitimate to do so. If it's not, if I don't have something concrete to say about it. It's a question of dialogue. It's a question of dialogue with a lot of strength and a lot of, deep-reaching thinking. And that's what I'm looking for in my teams. I've got lots of diverse teams in terms of ability, in terms of nationality, age, but also I talk with it's important to talk with a lot of people, and the more diverse those people are, the better, so that you can have a better understanding. Bertrand, yes, let me say a few words to conclude, and then we can take it. But we'll take a question first. Well, one question, maybe two. Yes, madam. Hello, Blanca. Mr. Kaka was talking about wasting, food waste. With my family, we have a family startup. It's an anti-waste app for go-to-go applications. So it's to look at environmental and societal problems. It's about acting not just against waste, cosmetic waste, because the figures are huge. It's about fighting against precariousness. Over 35% of French people don't have the means to buy hygienic products. Families change nappies of their children once a day sometimes. I just want to ask you, I have my own opinion because we've been working on the question for a year now. In your opinion, Blanca, the cosmetics world, is it ready to act against cosmetic waste and answer this terrible paradox that alongside the millions of euros wasted and and alongside that you have millions of French people who suffer from poverty? Yes, at L'Oréal we're already acting. We have to. So systematically we've got 36 brands. And we've got brands that are very accessible, shampoo for €2, for example, through to luxury brands. But there's a whole range of products. And we've also worked very much with the economic crisis on more accessible brands so that we could focus on product accessibility. We are against waste. We are making lots of efforts to change the way we sell our products. So we can have perfumes, hygienic products, products with refills. We work on water loop factories so that water is reused. And we'll have more between now and 2030. We're also working with trade fairs. We've got a product, it's called a shower head. I don't know how to say that in French. So it saves water. Up to 70% of the water is saved. We're also creating products that don't need to be rinsed or can be rinsed very easily. So we are looking at things from different points of view. We're looking at plastic recycling. We're looking at different materials so that less plastic is being used. These are things that are very important for us. So I would be happy to talk with you after the conference, if you like. Thank you. Let's hand over to Bertrand now. Can everybody hear me? Perhaps Christian and Mood would like to say something to conclude very quickly. We've got 3 minutes. Very quickly, a quick conclusion, Mood.
I think very quickly to conclude, I would just say everything has been touched on, but I think as individuals, we need to go out there and perhaps use an intersectional lens to everything we approach to understand people, to effect change. We all can start change from where we are, from where we stand in our homes, in our personal lives, in our organizations, in our companies. We always have to be alert and to want to have change and to amplify voices of those who are different to us. Stand there and think, whose voice can I amplify? What change? Where can I help? Where can I support? It doesn't have to be really huge changes. It can be really supporting small grassroots organizations, supporting charities, or really just understanding the issues and challenging ignorance. That's it.
Thank you.
Je vais être très rapide.
I'm going to be very quick because time is running out. So all of the discussions go back to this same idea. It's very difficult for us to see the big picture. So act on what is important for you, but take a few minutes a day a few hours a week or per month to question how your problem, your cause, is linked to the rest, and how you can invest, not just for your own cause, but to integrate that into something that's a whole. It's important to look at the complexity, not just the one thing. So let's work together, let's take time to do that, and we'll be making some proposals at our institute, the Human Adaptation Institute, but it's important to make the time in order to commit.
That I am taking away from the conference was something that Minister Pascal Donoghue said yesterday, which was pessimism is irresponsible. Finding the balance between keeping organizations and governments accountable and getting involved in losing hope is what's key for the future.
Alors j'anticipe.
So we've had lots of presents. So what you've said is very true. It's very emotional as well, dear Christian. Again, I've been coming here for 20 years. There are some very important moments, very strong moments. So there's something that I will be taking away with me, not because it's a magic figure. We've talked a lot about what we have to do. And how do we do it, though? How do we create change, as Sinead said? How can we not be fearful? How can we change people's look, the way they see the world? How can we feel concerned by this planet and feel concerned for all of the inhabitants on this planet, not just our own little corner of the world? It's not easy to open our eyes. There are lots of adverse conditions at individual level, as Christian said. There are different conditions. It's important to prioritize positive emotions rather than our negative emotions. It's important to find time. And thank you for coming on this Sunday morning to take time to talk with us. But, we're not alone. Cooperation is there, and it's important. It's about working collectively. There are limits. There are legal limits. There are moral limits. There are mental limits. There are financial limits. As you reminded us, we're able to spend $19 trillion on COVID, but we're not finding even a fraction of that amount to fight against hunger. And Muda, you said sometimes these difficulties build up. And the third point, obviously it's a source of wealth. We spend a lot of time saying this, that we don't have unhappy people on the stage here. Wealth for ourselves, wealth for the world. This is important. We mustn't, just 1 minute, please. We've got to target things properly. We can't do everything all the time for everybody. We want to know what our cause is, but we need to know how to articulate that cause, again, with the life of our planet and the species on the planet. It's possible straight away. It's possible for everybody. It's not just for a happy few in a corner of the world that is far away. It's also possible for companies. It's quite new. We talked a lot about responsibility of shareholders, and we've been reminded that it's not just about shareholders. That's a very positive message. It's still too rare, that kind of message. Sixth point, I talked about gardens to begin with. My little balcony, my little plot of land. This is something that's obvious. It's obvious to listen to other people. Our garden is our planet. We can't just stop at the border of our garden. We need to share things. We need to share our planet. Like you asked economists to think. We need to think about an economy for action. It's easier said than done. Let me come back to the question that was asked. This action, this engagement means passion, but also responsibility and confidence. And confidence is, in fact, the ingredient that has suffered over the last few years. There are lots of difficulties that we've been talking about in the public sector, in the government sector, in the private sector, in companies, but also in civil society. There's a magic triangle there. The relations between these three summits of the triangle have deteriorated. People are not confident anymore. They don't have confidence in each other. So perhaps we need to reach out and accept taking a risk between the three pillars of this triangle. And to finish, I would like to cite somebody. I've often used this citation, if you've already heard it. I think it applies to the conversation that we've had today. Jean Giraudoux, in the Guerre de Troie, n'aura pas lieu. Maybe you remember that. It's a play written in 1936. The idea is to avoid the Troy War. Ulysses says to the people from Troy that the privilege of great people is that they can look at catastrophes from the balcony. And I think that we are the great. In the park here, we're on the balcony. But we can't have that privilege. We need to get together. We need to come down from our balcony and make sure that the planet is not collapsing. Thank you.
Merci à tous d'avoir été.
Thank you, everybody, for being with us. And I'll let you go to the next sessions.